Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. It's me, Rocco, again. Thank you very much for joining me for another classic album review, and I hope everyone's doing well. Today, I don't know when I'm going to be uploading this, but it's a scorching hot July day. I mean, this is probably the hottest day of the year so far. Almost 40 degrees Celsius here in Vaughan, Ontario. And, damn, it's blazing out there. And, what better day to review one of the spiciest, fieriest, most flamboyant, Spanish, passionate, Latin-inspired bands of all time. That's right, we're talking about Santana. These guys have long been a favorite of mine. I haven't really talked much about them on the channel yet, but you know me, guys. I review prog, I review jazz fusion, hard rock, and Santana is just really an awesome melting pot of really all those genres. They got the heaviness, they got the Latin-inspired shit going on, they got the jazz fusion, and they're just a fantastic band. Obviously, Carlos Santana, he's one of those guitar gods. Everyone knows Santana. You know, he's up there with Jimmy Page, Jimi Hendrix. Eric Clapton is one of those, when you think of guitar hero, one of those guys that pops into your head. But, for my money, he's the most passionate of the bunch. I mean, he just has a way of just pouring his soul into that guitar like very few guitar players could. Okay, Jimmy Page did it in Led Zeppelin as well, but let's be honest, guys, Santana, when you listen to that shit, it just sounds so natural. It doesn't even sound like he's trying. He's just, translating what he feels in his soul onto an album. And I'm definitely going to be reviewing the first four Santana albums. I mean, how could I not? They're some of my all-time favorites. Abraxas, their second album, is, fuck, man, like, for many years, it's ranked in my maybe like top 30 albums of all time, which is a very tough bracket to crack into. It's just a timeless masterpiece. But the debut album, which we're going to be talking about today, from 1969, really laid the groundwork for that album. And it's great in its own right. I mean, this album from top to bottom is just a classic. Sure, it might not be as great as Abraxas and Caravanserai and even Santana 3, but it really laid the foundation. And what I love about this album is that the percussion, the Hammond organ from Greg Rowley, and Santana's guitar are all kind of on an equal playing field. Whereas on later albums, Santana kind of like stole the spotlight, and there's nothing wrong with that. Again, I mentioned those albums that came out after this I like even better, but I like how this is an even mix and really focuses in on the hard rock and Latin-inspired percussion, whereas the later albums kind of delve more into the jazz fusion kind of territory. So, yeah, it's a unique album in their discography. And, Santana's a band that I've always loved. I mean, when I was really getting into them with Abraxas, I think back in 2015, yeah, so about 5 years ago now, I was absolutely addicted to their first four albums, guys. 1, 2, and 3, I would just play all the time. And when I first heard Caravanserai, it was a little bit out of left field. I didn't really know anything about jazz fusion at the time. But since then, it's become one of my favorites. And sometimes I even point to that as being my favorite Santana album. But yeah, I've been on and off with these guys for so many years. And when hot, scorching days like this come along, it just reminds me to blast the Santana and just have a good old Latin rockin' time. So that's kind of my intro, guys. Now, without further ado, let's talk about the history behind this album. So, we can't talk about Santana without talking about one of the main founders of it, and the only consistent member throughout the entire band, the guy who gave the band its name, Carlos Santana, the one and only. And, when you hear the name Santana, it's easy to assume that Carlos is really the guy, like, leading the band, and writing the majority of the material and everything, and really taking over the sound. And, that's not necessarily true. There were a lot of... This band here is a very tight unit, very cohesive, and there's a lot of collaboration going on between them. So it wasn't really Santana running the show with a bunch of session musicians. Everyone here was integral to the sound, and they all had input. They all put their creativity into it and made it what it is. But nonetheless, we have to talk about Carlos Santana. He grew up in Mexico. He's a Mexican-American. His father was in a freaking mariachi band, for God's sakes. Doesn't get more Latino than that. Then later on, I think in his teens or like late childhood, he moved to the States. And yeah, I think he went to, high school and everything, and really started getting into blues rock, like B.B. King, John Lee Hooker, all those like classic like 50s and 60s electric blues artists. But he always like, had his Spanish roots going on there, and listening to Latino music. And then when rock and roll came out, he was big on Richie Valens because he was one of the first Latino rock stars per se. And yeah, so he had a very diverse upbringing, and a lot of his friends were listening to totally different things. Some people were listening to jazz, some people were listening to blues, rock, and everything. So Santana just soaked up all these influences and decided to become a full-time musician in 1966. So things weren't easy for him at first. At first, he was literally busking out on the streets, literally playing for change. He worked at a diner as a dishwasher for a couple years, and yeah, he'd be playing with other like street musicians at the time there in San Francisco. And in 1966 he finally assembled a band, calling it the Santana Blues Band, or which would later obviously become this band, just simply titled Santana. And in that band we had Marcus the Magnificent Malone on percussion. Sad story about him coming up soon. And Greg Raleigh on organ and vocals, who would be a long time collaborator with Santana for at least like their first four albums before branching off and forming the band Journey. Which it's funny to think that members of Santana broke off into Journey, because you hear things like "Don't Stop Believing" and things like that. It sounds nothing like Santana, but that was further down the road for Journey. So really, it's interesting to think that like that band came off of a few members of Santana leaving after the Caravanserai album. Pretty cool music history right there. You would have never thought it. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself like I always do. So this is 1966 San Francisco. And again, Santana was really soaking up all these different influences at the time. And another main influence that he was getting into was the jazz guitarist Gabor Szabo, who really introduced Santana to a jazzier method of guitar playing, which would last throughout his entire career. And they were getting noticed. I mean, they were out on the club circuit playing gigs and things like that, and really gaining kind of a cult following because of their unique combination of Latino percussion and guitar playing style, combined with Greg Rowley's awesome Hammond organ and deep masculine vocals with the hard rock edge. So again, this was kind of before hard rock. They were more bluesy at this point, but still making waves for their very unique sound. And lucky enough, concert promoter and manager Billy Graham was watching them play once, and he's a huge like Latin American or Latino music fan or aficionado, and he was really impressed by the band, so he took them under his wing and started developing them further. And thank God that Bill Graham was a Latin music aficionado, because I don't think anyone else would have been able to get them a record deal. I mean, from the very start, a lot of the people they auditioned for, a lot of like the record executives and producers told the band, like, you're never going to make it playing this Latino music infused with hard rock. It's never going to work. And look at Santana now, just laughing all the way to the bank. But yeah, at the time, they were very kind of underestimated. And it took a guy like, Bill Graham to really get this band up and running. And the thing was, Bill Graham, he did recognize that there was some components of the band that were a little bit uncommercial. Again, they were mostly an instrumental band. They didn't really focus on the vocals. And he started, Bill Graham started saying, like, maybe you guys can, mix, you can make a compromise. You can mix your instrumental prowess with a little bit of vocals, and that's exactly what they did. And it's not like they were forced to do this, but it ended up turning out very well because Greg Rowley or Raleigh is a great vocalist, and whenever they do use the vocals, which is few and far in between, they really shine and add a little bit of commerciality to the album, and that's never a bad thing. So again, but at its core, these guys were an instrumental band, a jamming band, and that really comes through with this album and their first three in general. So they're playing the San Francisco club circuit for a couple years, and then come 1969, he secured them with a record deal, none other than Columbia Records, one of the huge record companies out there. A lot of the jazz musicians were signed by them and everything like that. So it was really Santana's big break. You would think it would be their big break, but really their big break came a little bit later in '69, where their manager Bill Graham was asked to help promote the famous Woodstock 1969 music festival, and he agreed to do it on one condition: Santana would be allowed to play there. And we all know what happened next. They delivered one of the all-time most intense, powerful rock performances of all time that literally catapulted the band into stardom overnight. And if you watch the video of them playing Soul Sacrifice on YouTube, I mean, if you guys are, if you guys are rock fans, you've probably seen it already, but you have to watch it. I mean, it's such an insane performance. Just so much passion and energy went into it. And apparently, Santana and the other members of the band were high as fuck on LSD, fucking thinking their instruments were snakes and wild animals and shit. And I don't know. It's absolutely insane. Who knows if it's true? It probably is, but damn, their performance did not suffer from it. Let me tell you that much. And yeah, that really catapulted them into the stars they are today. But let's back it up a bit. Let's talk a little bit about the recording of the album, which occurred earlier on in the year in 1969. So they went to the studio, and at this point, the band consisted of that core trio of Carlos Santana, Greg Raleigh, and Marcus Malone on percussion, as well as a few other musicians as well that didn't end up appearing on the album here, on the finished product. And they went into the studio, and somewhere around this time, Marcus the Magnificent Malone was involved in a manslaughter case. Apparently, he killed someone in self-defense, and he was thrown into prison. So that kind of derailed the whole album. They had to hire a few new musicians. Luckily, they struck gold with Michael Cabarello and the other player here, Jose Arias, who was a Nicaraguan percussionist. So they got two percussionists for the price of one. And Marcus Malone, poor guy, he was in jail. And when he was finally released in 1973, the poor guy ended up homeless, couldn't get back on his feet. And until recent years, the man was homeless. I think he was homeless until fucking 2013 or so, when a reporter discovered him and finding out that he was originally in Santana's band. He called up Carlos Santana, and they reunited briefly. And that's another heartwarming YouTube video, how Santana just embraced him with open arms. And it's just sad to see, imagine that happened to Santana. Imagine instead of Marcus Malone, it was him that was involved in manslaughter. And that's what ended up becoming of him. And things were looking okay for Marcus at this point. I mean, he had reunited with Santana, and he was trying to get back on his feet. He was originally going to be scheduled to play on Santana's Santana 4 from 2016, I believe, kind of like their big comeback album. But it never ended up happening for one reason or another. And the poor guy, he got into some kind of car accident, or he got hit by a tire or something. And he was on life support. Now he's in a critical care center. So really the whole life of Marcus Malone was just, just tragedy from start to finish. And I'm assuming there's a lot of drug use involved as well, from what I gathered from the YouTube video I saw. So yeah, poor guy. But anyway, Santana ended up getting two fantastic percussionists. So let's get out of that dark space we were just talking about there. Let's dive back into the history. But anyway, Santana got back into the studio, and they got two awesome percussionists with Michael Cabarello and Jose Arias. Just fantastic players. And also I should mention David Brown on the bass. He was also a member of the band at this point. And Michael Shreve on the drums. So not only did they have two percussionists, but also a drummer, and a fantastic drummer at that. Longtime member of the band who kind of outlasted all the rest of them. And yeah, they went into the studio, recorded the album. Then a week after their famous Woodstock performance, it was released. And again, just a critical and commercial success. Right away, this album shot up the charts. I believe it went to something crazy like number 4 or something. It really catapulted the band into that, superstar status. And well-deserved at that, because no one was really doing what they were doing at the time. It was just such a unique sound with the Latin influence. And they would go on, in my opinion, to become one of the best early 70s bands. Just absolutely stellar. Now, following this album here, creative differences began to emerge in the group. Greg Raleigh wanted to focus a little bit more on the harder rocking sections, whereas Carlos was going deeper and deeper into jazz and jazz fusion, which became evident. And it's easy to see who won out on that debate, because, Abraxas and even the next album after that, slowly transitioning to the full-on jazz fusion that they would end up becoming. But yeah, the band was called Santana again. But in those early years, their first 3 albums was just a perfect combination of all those elements. And although the creative differences were appearing, the band was still pretty tight for their first 3 albums. So yeah, an awesome trilogy of albums that, every rock fan has to hear at least one point in their lives. And if you're feeling a little bit adventurous, take a deep dive into the other Santana shit. Now, I haven't heard every single Santana album, so I just want to get that across here. I've heard their first 5 plus Santana 4, so I know there's a lot of other albums. I know they went kind of commercial and everything, and the 80s happened and all that stuff. But at least listen to the first 3, okay, guys? Maybe you don't have to hear them all. Like, God knows I haven't, but at least the first three. All right, guys. So now, without further ado, let's talk about this album a little bit more in depth and get into the overall review. All right, guys. So let's take a deep dive into Santana's debut album. And this album here, guys, I could see a lot of Santana fans really considering this album their best. To be honest, I already mentioned I like the Braxis a little bit better than this one and the following albums. But this one here is definitely like their heaviest, their most straight to the point, hard rocking album that again really combines all those elements. You got the Latin inspired stuff, you got Santana's screaming solos, but most importantly, you got an awesome groove going on with almost all of these tracks, whether it be a cool bluesy groove or like this kind of upbeat, up-tempo kind of samba thing with the percussion in the background. So definitely their most straightforward album. Doesn't really go out there into the more atmospheric stuff, like the more refined stuff like on Abraxas and the ones coming after that. So I could definitely see a lot of people really considering this the epitome of Santana, and then ironically, wandering off into more experimental territory, losing a few fans along the way. And yeah, so this album is definitely for someone just getting into the band, just someone who likes early 70s hard rock, but it's still unique and a very, very unique album, guys. Again, I mentioned all the different elements that go into this album that just give it that unique flair that no one was really doing at the time. I mean, this was what, late 69, early 70? Yeah, this album did come out in 69, and honestly, this was one of those groundbreaking albums. So many unique things going on here. Number one, of course, we got the Latin-inspired percussion, which is really the backbone of this album, and a huge, huge part of this entire thing. I mean, it takes almost center stage at some points, even overshadowing Santana's guitar. And, man, you got to give a shout-out to Michael Carabello and Joe Arias on the congas and tamales and all that, Did I just say tamales? Is that how you pronounce it? All those, like, Latin percussion things really driving the song, giving it that foundation. But let's not forget about Michael Shreve. I mean, holy shit, this guy's a monster on the drums. Fantastic drummer. And again, if you watch that live performance from Woodstock, you will see him absolutely going nuts. Probably because he was on LSD at the time, but just bashing the shit out of those drums. So honestly, when half the band is percussion, you have a very, very, very strong album rhythmically. And the bass playing by David Brown is incredible as well. The rhythm section, can't say enough about these guys. But the other unique thing about the band, man, Greg Raleigh on that Hammond organ. I mean, when do you ever hear Hammond organ combined with Latin-inspired grooves? I mean, almost never. And that just gives the album another touch of that, late 60s psychedelia. That adds a unique flavor. And he's always laying down these awesome bluesy grooves. And really a huge integral part of the album, right up there with Santana as well. And that's what I'm talking about. On later albums, Santana really started taking center stage and dominating with the guitar. And there's nothing wrong with that. But this album here really has the balance between the organ playing and the guitar. And the organ's really just driving this entire thing. And of course, we get Santana's blistering, fiery, passionate solos. His playing on this album, it's a little bit less... I think his playing got a little bit more refined with the following albums. He could really dive into those kind of ballady, dreamy, atmospheric kind of sections with his guitar, just, crying with passion and melancholy. On this album here, his solos are all pretty blistering and, up-tempo, which is fantastic because Santana's got that Latin fiery flair that he puts into all his solos. And yeah, but he never really, steals the show. Even on the first track, I mean, 3 whole minutes go by or, something like that before Santana even comes into the mix. It's all organ and drums and everything. And yeah, you could really tell this band was set up as an instrumental outfit because I think about at least 70% of the tracks on this song don't have any vocals. And you could really tell that these guys put jamming before everything else. But again, the vocals don't take away from the album. It's not like when a song with vocals comes on, you feel like, this is kind of the boring, kind of commercially friendly single on the album. It always sounds like, it has a place on the album, is what I'm trying to say. So the vocals don't distract from the instrumentation. Sure, you got the track Evil Ways, which is definitely the least improvisational track on the album. But again, that's not really a bad thing. It's just the one track out of all of them. And it became a hit single for the band, again, helping them propel their career into the stratosphere. So I don't mind Evil Ways, but yeah, some people do say it is kind of like the commercial, like the least interesting track, but it doesn't really bother me. And I gotta talk about Greg Raleigh's vocals. I absolutely love his vocals in Santana. He has this kind of masculine, ballsy kind of attitude and bluesy feel to his vocals that really add a lot to the track, in contrast with a lot of the Latin inspired backup vocals, which are kind of like toned down on this album. It appears on one track, but on the later albums, Abraxas and the one after that, when we got those Latin kind of chants in the background, the contrast with Greg Raleigh's bluesy, more American sounding voice is pretty cool. And yeah, I like how he gives the songs a lot of passion and a lot of feel. Good vocalist, actually. He's not really singing his ass off, but his vocals perfectly suit the music when the songs do have vocals. So absolutely incredible. I gotta say, the structure of the album as well, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, the songs here range from I'd say about 3 to 5 or 6 minutes. We don't really get any like long epics or anything like that. But they do save the longest and best song on the album for last, with Soul Sacrifice. But yeah, other than that, it's just an album you could just put on any time of the week. It doesn't really take any significant effort to get into. It's a very, although it is experimental in terms of it being a unique album, just the grooves are infectious, and you hear this thing one time, and you're absolutely going to love it, guys. So if you haven't heard this album yet, just go out and listen to it. You owe it to yourself. I can't imagine any rock fan not being able to get sucked in with this one. The next few maybe might take a little bit of trying, but this one here is just a must listen for any rock fan. So I think that's all I got to say about it. It's just a great album. Now let's dissect this album track by track. Kicking off the album, we get one of the coolest, grooviest tracks in Santana's entire discography, Waiting. It's an instrumental, and you're going to be hearing that a lot from me, guys, because, as I mentioned, this album's very instrumental. And this is a very cool song. I mean, again, I mentioned that Santana doesn't even really come into this track until, the first 2 minutes. Sure, he's doing some, cool, laid-back rhythm guitar in the background, but he doesn't really do much on this track until, the last minute of the song. And but when he does, oh my god, guys, he takes this song to incredible heights. But the first 3 minutes of the track are fantastic as well. It just starts off with this awesome, groovy, almost funky, pumping bass line with the Latin percussion, and then the organ comes in, playing the main melody, It's just this really cool kind of groove, this laid-back groove that you just let wash over you. And it's awesome. And then again, Santana's just doing this chugging rhythm guitar in the background. Very subtle, very understated. The organ's really the main instrument here, along with the congas and all that shit. And then the organ starts soloing, and it's just really this cool kind of groove. You just sit back, have a glass of wine, smoke a cigar, just enjoy. Then at the 1 minute 50 second mark, Santana starts to emerge. His riffing gets a little bit more aggressive, and he starts soloing, and he starts trading off with the organ of Greg Raleigh, and it's kind of this cool back and forth, stop and start kind of thing. And you think it's going to climax, but instead it gets into this 1 minute awesome kind of percussion section with that same groovy bass line going, and that lasts for a minute, and you're back into the coolness. But don't worry, guys, that was just a taste of what was to come, because the song gets absolutely climactic in the last 3 minutes. Santana comes in with this extremely epic, climactic kind of riff at the end of the song. The and then he starts soloing, and it's just a frenzy, a very intense solo with those big climaxes and everything, just perfectly ending off the track. It's hard to believe the song started off so cool and laid back and funky, and then we're getting into this fucking almost Mahavishnu orchestra level intensity with the Santana's guitar playing. So yeah, Waiting is definitely a highlight on the album. Easily a 9, maybe even a 9.5 out of 10, somewhere within that range. It's a classic track, one of the big highlights on the album for me, and yeah, I love it. All right, and then we got the second track on the album, Evil Ways, the big hit single from the album. And, my least favorite, if I had to pick one song that I would choose as my least favorite track on the album, it would be this song. And it's still a really good song. And, it's ironic that it was the single off the album. And, you might think I'm trying to sound countercultural and, going against the grain by saying the single is the worst song. And usually, that's not the case. I usually love the singles from the album. But yeah, this one here, overall, it's got the least uniqueness going for it. Sure, it's got that cool kind of Latin-inspired groove that drives the song, but instead of the cool kind of laid-back, relaxing feel of the previous song, or at least the first 2 minutes. This one here kind of has a loungy, more of a loungy, jazzy, bluesy kind of vibe. And, my mind does wander at some points. The vocals are pretty okay. It's the whole group singing the track, and, there's some cool, like, sharp organ kind of riffs coming in through the song, but, some good rhythm guitar by Santana. Catchy hooks, a very catchy tune. But yeah, it's nothing special for me. A good song, I would say above average for sure, but not really amazing. But then at the 3-minute mark, Santana comes in with this awesome, climactic, furious guitar solo. And I feel like, holy shit, man, if they expanded this part of the song and made it like, maybe a couple more minutes, because it's only about 3.5 minutes long, this could have been one of the major highlights, because this is another fast and furious Santana solo, and the whole song just gets really heavy for a second there, or a minute there. And, it's awesome. And it makes you wish, like, the first, 2-3 minutes were, match that, but they don't. But overall, a really catchy song. I could definitely see why it was a hit. Very bluesy, I guess the least Latin-inspired of all the tracks on the album. So yeah, Evil Ways, I would give a solid 8 out of 10, maybe even an 8.5. Well, we'll keep it at an 8 for now, but yeah, really cool track. Freaking awesome track, guys. Song number 3, Shades of Time. This one here is just such a passionate, emotional song, and I feel like it's one of the most underrated Santana tracks ever. I mean, it's got everything here. I love how it starts off again, kind of loungy and laid back, like the previous song, but the vocals get so inspirational with the chorus. I mean, holy shit, when Greg Raleigh sings, "Go out and make it better, you can make it if you try," he puts just so much passion into his vocals. And, during this track, it really reminded me of the band Chicago, which is another awesome early 70s band that I got to review one of these days. But the vocals there kind of reminded me of, I don't know, what's his name? Terry Kath? Yeah, that's it. Terry Kath of Chicago. I don't know, that thought just popped in my head. But very inspirational vocals. And then we get some frantic riffing during the chorus, which is kind of a contrast to the verses, which are more ensemble singing, laid back, loungy kind of samba feel. But during those inspirational choruses, Santana's just really riffing on that shit. And that's what I mean by when I say that this album is a bit heavier than the following ones. We don't really get that frantic riffing on the preceding album. So, again, another point for the debut. But awesome. And then we get an amazing, intense Santana solo at the 1-minute mark. Just, it starts off extremely climactic, kind of like the ending of the first track on the album. But then we get into this passionate, kind of almost jazzy, more laid-back solo. And, again, very Latin-inspired, very jazzy, and something that Santana would definitely develop on further albums. But we get a good taste of it here, and it's just such an expressive solo. You almost don't want it to end when the main theme comes back in, but then the ending of the song kind of reprises that entire solo, so we get another healthy dose of that, and just awesome. I love when bands like reprise guitar solos. Black Sabbath did it a lot with, not to get off topic, but tracks like NIB and War Pigs and things like that, where they actually like reprise guitar solos. Shades of Time is a good example of that too. It just really brings it all together. An awesome song. Probably not as great as the song Waiting, but a close second. So I would give this a 9 out of 10, definitely. And the third track leads directly into this one, Savor, which is this awesome, intense, 3-minute extravaganza instrumental. And now that I think about it, I think the next track here also leads right out of this song. So it's kind of like a medley of tracks, if you think about it that way, starting with Shades of Time. Savor is a fantastic song. Definitely, this track here is one of the songs that really emphasizes the Latin percussion. But right out of that, with this awesome kind of samba groove, we get the main theme on the organ, kind of similar to the first track, but really up-tempo, and then Santana comes in with the furious riffing, and it just gets into this awesome jam that just builds, and holy shit, it has this amazing drive to it. And props to Greg Raleigh for really intensifying his organ at the climax of the song, along with Santana's riffing. It just really melds into one just extremely intense, passionate instrumental, very frantic, very heavy if you want to think about it that way. Not heavy in terms of heavy doobie Black Sabbath style riffs, but heavy in terms of the intensity, which is fantastic. Then it finally bursts at its seams in the last minute. It's just this great percussion solo that ends the track and really just proves how strong this rhythm section was. a very, very awesome song, Savor. One of the best instrumentals on the album, if you ask me. Easily a 9, maybe an 8.5 at the worst, but somewhere within an 8.5 to 9 range. Really enjoy this track. Then coming right off of Savor, we get another great instrumental on the album, Jingo. This one here, it's a 4.5 minute track, and I think very early on in the release history of this album, I think this might have been actually the first single that the band released, which is funny because it's a very uncommercial single, very Afro-Caribbean inspired. It's got like the Latino ensemble kind of chanting folky vocals that I was mentioning earlier that, they kind of toned down on this album but expanded on future releases. Not a very accessible track, so, props to Santana for releasing it. But yeah, great track. Really awesome, heavy kind of jungle African beat with the percussion at the beginning. Really cool. And I love how the organ just comes swirling in and just gradually builds up, followed by Santana's crying guitar riff, which is kind of like the main theme of the track. Awesome shit right there. It gets pretty intense. Then we get the Latin vocals with the Latin chant coming in. I wouldn't really call it, I would still consider this song an instrumental because the vocal chant is really acting as an instrument in this case. But yeah, really, really takes you somewhere else. I mean, you listen to this and it feels like you're on the beaches of Mexico just watching this folk band just jamming it out on the beach. Really cool stuff there. Then it halfway gets back into like this awesome percussion part. The organ comes back in, and the whole track kind of repeats itself. But it doesn't get repetitive. Again, it's only 4.5 minutes, so a pretty short, compact track. But I love how when Santana plays the main theme the second time, he puts a lot more passion into it and just kind of lets it wander off into like a short 15-20 second guitar solo there. Just a really cool track. I don't know, Savor has the intensity, but this one here just has the feel and the atmosphere to it. I don't know. I would probably say I like Savor a bit better, so I'd give this one maybe an 8.5 out of 10 rather than a 9, but it's still a fantastic instrumental, so great track. Then we get another vocal-oriented track, Persuasion. And this one here is a heavy song. I mean, Santana's guitar riffing here is absolutely frantic, absolutely intense. And it's a pretty ballsy, bluesy tune, especially with Greg Raleigh's awesome vocals. But yeah, very short song, only 2 minutes. But really, that's all it needs to be. It just comes in, gets the job done, gets pretty climactic at points, but maintains its heavy rockin' kind of feel throughout the entire track, provided by Santana's, again, frantic riffing. Honestly, guys, Persuasion, I don't even know what else to say about it. It's just this cool, kind of short, punchy song in the middle of the album, and coming after those two, like, very percussion-heavy, Latin-inspired songs with Savor and then Jingo. It's a nice kind of return back to, some of the earlier tracks on the album. But definitely, if I had to pick the heaviest song on the album, the most hard-rocking, it would definitely be Persuasion. But yeah, really cool track. I don't know what else to say. I would give Persuasion a 9 out of 10 any day of the week. Right, so coming up next on the album, guys, we got the track Treat. And, it's a pretty fitting title because this kind of is a treat in and of itself. It's different from the rest of the tracks on the album in the sense that it's just very laid back, almost ballad-esque, cool jazz, kind of laid back kind of track. It's really cool. And on this track here, Greg Raleigh, he ditches his organ, his Hammond organ at the side for the first time on the entire album and just plays a freaking piano. And it's beautiful. He's a beautiful piano player, especially on this track. He adds a lot of those jazzy inflections to it. You could tell that, he's from more of a blues and jazz school of things rather than being classically inspired. And yeah, it's just this really nice kind of, laid back groove. Santana's just gently strumming the guitar in the background with some cool riffage. But then later on in the track, I think at about the 2-minute mark, Santana comes in with a signature solo. I mean, just absolutely blistering. Nothing else really to say about it. It's just, just picture a classic Santana guitar solo, and bam, you get a healthy dose of that, smack dab in the middle of the track. Just really bringing things up, really elevating things before going back into the jazzy groove dominated by Greg Raleigh's piano playing. And yeah, really interesting song. Again, it's totally different. The percussion here, it isn't really Latin, I would say. It's more jazz inspired, so yeah, just a little dash of variety on the album. I really enjoy this song. It's not one of the all-time highlights. It's not one of the standout tracks on the album, but it's pretty good. It's this nice little oasis before the last two tracks, which really bring things back home. And yeah, I can't complain. Really good song. So I don't know, for a score, I would give this no higher than an 8.5 out of 10, but it's still an excellent track. All right, guys. So remember in the history section where I said that Santana started off as a blues-based band, just called the Santana Blues Band? And I bet you're wondering, sure, the album's had bluesy moments, bluesy guitar licks here and there, but we haven't really gotten a full-on heavy blues track so far. Well, the wait is over, guys, because the second last track on the album, You Just Don't Care, is just that. Again, just like the previous song, this one here really sticks out on the album as being a unique track in the sense that it's this really, really heavy, blistering blues song with an almost doom metal style guitar riff that goes throughout the entire track. And again, it's very distant from the other tracks. It doesn't really have anything Latin inspired. The percussion is pretty much just limited to the drumming by Michael Shreve. And yeah, some really passionate organ playing and singing by Greg Raleigh really emotes on this track, puts a lot of balls and passion and power into it. And even Santana's guitar solo in the middle of the song, you could tell that, he's going for a totally different mood, very, very blues inspired. I mean, I don't even know how else to describe it. I mean, if you've heard a blues guitar solo, this is just pretty much that Santana style, so pretty much just better. but yeah, a really heavy, intense, kind of smoldering track closing out the album, just really showing that, they didn't really abandon their blues roots. Sure, they did lean more towards the Latin-inspired side and everything, but they could still crank out a good blues tune later on in the album. And it's just something else that gives it a lot of variety. These last two tracks here really showed you what Santana had up their sleeve, how they were such a diverse band. And again, they would continue doing so on further albums. But yeah, You Just Don't Care. It's a great blues song. Again, just like the song before it, it's not like an absolute highlight on the album, but it's really good. So I would give it an 8.5 out of 10. And then finally closing out the album, we got the longest track, the 6.5-minute improvisational masterclass, Soul Sacrifice. And, I mentioned a few times earlier that this was my favorite track on the album. And it really is. It is my favorite track. But let me tell you guys, the album version always leaves a bitter taste in my mouth because comparing it to that iconic live performance, it just doesn't do it justice, guys. You have to listen to the live version from Woodstock, which is just so much more passionate, so much more intense, and just better overall. But that doesn't detract from the greatness of the studio album version. Just pretend the Woodstock one doesn't exist for a second. The studio version is still fantastic. And really, this is just, the mission statement of Santana. It's really got everything. And it's really just a bunch of solos at the end of the day, which I usually complain about sometimes, but man, the solos are fantastic and just so well done. They never overstay their welcome. And the main theme of the track, which kind of breaks up the action, is pretty awesome as well. It's just this organ dun, 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 with this like crazy drum fill breaking it up. It's pretty simple, but pretty effective, pretty dramatic. But yeah, it's all about the solos on this song, and everyone really has a chance to shine. It starts off with congas galore. I mean, this is just a samba shuffle unlike any other. And then the drums join in, and it has this awesome percussive feel. Then before you know, we get the organ, the stop and start kind of main melody of the track with the furious drumming in between. Michael Shreve's just a beast on this song. Again, if you've seen that live performance from Woodstock, you know what I'm talking about. But then all of a sudden, at the 50-second mark, this guitar solo kind of comes in. It's pretty cool. It has this like stop and start action going on and trades off with these organ lines between the pauses in the solo. But then just like any Santana solo on the album, it just gets really intense, really climactic. But then right when it's at the peak of its intensity, it winds down and we get this awesome like long percussion section. So it starts off with the congas and all the Latin-inspired Afro-Caribbean drumming. But then before you know it, Michael Shreve comes in with this awesome drum solo. And again, this solo never stays its welcome. It just gets the job done. Just comes in, kicks your ass, and then it's out before bursting back into the organ with the main theme. And I think we're about 3 minutes into the track right now, and there's still another 3.5 to go. A lot more solos to come. So the next one is an organ solo, or what you think is going to be an organ solo. But then the guitar ends up coming in and it just fuses with it and it swells up. And it's just a really emotional part of the song. The song's been pretty rocking and pretty grooving so far. But this part here really brings that classic trademark Santana passion into it. And just a fantastic guitar solo there. You thought it was going to start off as an organ solo, but it worked its way into a guitar solo somehow. But then we get an organ solo, so don't worry, guys. And it lasts even longer than Santana's solo here. So, that really goes to show how in their early days, this really was a band of equals, because Greg Raleigh's like 1.5 minute organ solo here. It's awesome. And again, just like Santana's, it gets really intense. Sounds almost like distorted at the end of the solo, which is pretty cool. Then, it's another kind of false kind of thing on the track, because this Santana comes in with this bluesy kind of guitar lick, and you're like, oh, here comes like the solo of a lifetime. But no, we don't get that. It crashes back into the main theme again, rather than developing to the solo, throws a false ending at you guys, and then ends with this, this awesome crescendo at the end, with ending this track off with a bang. So fantastic track, and it could have easily been extended to by another 4 minutes had Santana done another one of his classic solos. But I think it's the perfect length just the way it is. And, just really holds your attention throughout. Just a great track. Really meant to be played live due to its improvisational nature, all the solos and everything. And a very, very percussive song, to say the least. So Soul Sacrifice, I think it's viewed as a classic by a lot of Santana fans. One of their best songs. The studio version, I would give a 9 to a 9.5 out of 10. Again, it's my favorite song in the album due to the live version, but if it was between this and Waiting at the beginning, it would be tough to choose, but definitely a 9 to a 9.5. And there we have it, guys. That's the 1969 debut from Santana. Just jam-packed with loads of awesome tracks, 9 songs to be exact, and a lot of highlights for me. Again, the first track, Waiting, is a big highlight for me. Obviously, Soul Sacrifice. Savor is actually just another incredible instrumental, one of my favorites. So of the instrumentals, those will be my top 3. Of the songs with vocals, I would definitely say Persuasion, Shades of Time, and yeah, that's it. Those 2 there are my 2 favorites. So those 5 tracks are just all-time Santana classics. The other ones, they're great, but, they're not fantastic like what we would get on the next album and even the few albums after that. But overall, just fantastic album. Really shows where Santana was going. Great balance between the percussion, the organ playing, and Santana's passionate guitar playing. Some people might think like, the guitar playing is a little bit one-dimensional compared to his later albums. And I would somewhat agree with that. But he definitely brings the heat when he does come into the tracks, and just gives a fantastic performance. But yeah, on later albums, he would diversify his guitar playing technique and sound. And again, really put a lot of that more atmospheric, emotional vibe into it. But great start, great debut album. And again, a lot of people are going to consider this their favorite because it is like the heaviest, the most hard rocking. It's got the blues elements going on, especially on that one track, and maybe like here and there on a few other ones. So yeah, guys, Santana's debut album. Definitely listen to it if you haven't already. Like, you owe it to yourself. Stay tuned for next time, guys, where I'm going to be reviewing Abraxas, my personal favorite Santana album. And again, I mentioned one of my all-time favorite albums, probably like top 30 level quality right there. Just such a great album. And of course, I always appreciate you guys watching. Definitely leave any suggestions in the comment section down below, and I'll be happy to get to it eventually. Take care, guys. Thanks for watching.